got this talk about hollies really came about several years ago, 4 years ago, because as you'll see when I put up the slides, it's got a banner for our 40th anniversary that I was using that year. It's nothing more difficult than speaking to a plant society about the plant that they all specialize in. So I was speaking to the Holly Society and speaking about hollies. I said, can I do some like hollies and related plants? No, we want all hollies. So, what can you do? So a little bit about hollies before I get into the talk and switch over to sharing my screen. Hollies are a big group. They're in the Aquifoliaceae family, and the genus is Ilex. There used to be two genera in the Aquifoliaceae. There was Ilex and then a North American native genus called Nemapanthus. They've since recently moved Nemapanthus into Ilex, so it's just one in there. And depending on your information source, there's anywhere from 500 to 800 species in the Ilex genus. So that's an awful lot. Most are evergreen. There's probably fewer than 30 or 50 that are deciduous. So most keep their leaves. Quite a lot of them are tropical and subtropical. So there's a lot of them that we can't grow at all. But they go up to high elevations and mountains and are one of the more cold hardy, some species, one of the more cold hardy broadleaf evergreens we can grow in colder climates. Mostly trees and shrubs, some kind of creeping ground covers. And I read there are climbers in there, and it took me a while to figure out what holly actually climbs. There's one in Colombia called Ilex scandens. Scandens means kind of creeping, climbing. It usually refers to plants that are kind of shrubby, but if you give them something to grow through, the shoots will grow up very long and kind of sprawl through them. So, the trees, the largest plants can grow up to 100 feet tall. They can get massive, massive trees. And then there are some little ones with leaves that are about 1/8 of an inch long that only grow about, 1.5 inches high, 2 inches high, and a foot or two across. So it's a pretty varied genus of plants. And how you know them, how you recognize them is, well, it's not easy. Alternate leaves are one thing. That's how you can tell the difference between it and some other plants that look alike. And we're going to do a little quiz. So you have alternate leaves. If they have fruit on them, that's pretty obvious. Although they won't all have fruit because they're mostly dioecious, meaning there are separate male and female plants. Although they can have functional male parts on plants that are mostly female. If you go into a population and you look at the flowers when they're blooming, most bloom in spring, at least most temperate ones. In a population, you'll find ones that are all female, ones that are all male, and then ones that will have some functioning, even if rudimentary, male parts, anthers and stamens on female plants. If you look at them in flower, they're mostly greenish white, kind of off-white, creamy white. There are some purplish flowered ones and orangish flowered ones and yellowish, but those are kind of the outliers. They have a fruit, which is, we call them holly berries, but technically they are drupes. Now, drupe normally refers to a fruit that has a single seed inside a hardened endocarp inside. So all the stone fruits like nectarines and cherries and olives and those kinds of things, avocado are drupes, but a drupe can have multiple seeds inside. So technically the fruit is a drupe. And the fruits are generally red to black, occasionally white, occasionally orange and yellow, although that usually is more in kind of horticultural forms. And they are slightly toxic. There are 3 species which have caffeine in them. So there's the one people know mostly that's really getting a resurgence right now, and actually there are several companies making it, is Ilex paraguayensis, which you make yerba mate out of, which is a caffeinated drink. That's from, paraguayensis. It's from South America. Our own Ilex vomitoria has caffeine in it. And there's one more, but I can't even remember which one that is. The paraguayensis is the most important one and is actually a very important crop in South America. The hollies are circumglobal. They go everywhere. There's one, maybe two species in Europe. Ilex aquifolium, the English holly, is the main one, and that's what the whole genus was based on. Ilex aquifolium does not grow great for us in the Southeast. You can grow it, but it's if you're going to grow it, it's best if it's been grafted onto something like Nellie Stevens holly, which grows so well for us. There is Ilex parado subspecies iberica, which grows in Portugal and Spain, although some people think that's part of Ilex aquifolium. There's also Ilex canariensis, which grows in Madeira and the Canary Islands, which you could say is Europe, I guess. What is that? Macaronesia. There's two in continental Africa, Ilex aquifolium and Ilex mitis, and there's one in Australia, Ilex arnheminensis. I'm just letting you know that. So if there's 800, there's only a handful that are out of Europe, Africa, and Australia. So the bulk of them are in Asia, China, Vietnam, Myanmar, Korea, Taiwan, Japan, all those areas down into the Philippines and that, and then the rest in the Americas, North and South America. So that's where the bulk of them are going to be found. All right, so hollies. Can everybody see me okay? You know where the little reaction button is on the bottom? If y'all can hear me, put a thumbs up.
You're good, Mark.
Okay. Without sharing my screen, I want to make sure people can see, because I went out and took cuttings this morning. Some hollies are pretty easy to see, to know they're a holly. You got the serrate leaf, and this is very typical. Hollies have simple leaves, meaning they're kind of usually ovate or lanceolate, but they don't have deep lobes. They can be entire, meaning without any kind of edge to them. They can be spined or spinulose like this, or they can be serrate with little small serrations on there. And of course, the fruit, they flower and fruit along the stems in spring. So the fruit forms all along the stems as well. If it's got fruit on it, that's a pretty easy way to tell that it's a holly. So some are easy to tell. That's pretty simple, right? Now they can get a little bit more difficult. If this didn't have fruit on there, you might look at this and try and figure out, well, is this a holly? Is this something else? With the fruit, it makes it a lot easier to see. But as you can see, hollies can have an entire leaf without any kind of serrations or anything on there. One way to tell is to look for many hollies in the little, where the leaves come out, have little stipules. These are little kind of leaf-like growths. They can be very, very hard to see in some. They also tend to have lenticels. And these are the little dots on the stems. All hollies have lenticels. They're hard to see on some evergreen species, but they're usually very easy to see on the deciduous one. Okay, so the first one I showed was Ilex Mary Nell. This is the sister seedling to Nellie R. Stevens, one of the most successful landscape plants ever introduced. Mary Nell's a little bit, in my mind, a little bit nicer. It's got a smaller leaf. It's glossier. It's a good fruiter. The second one I showed with the entire leaves, this is a hybrid from the National Arboretum called Cherry Bomb, which I love because I like the non-spiny ones a lot, and it's got really large fruit, and it's got them kind of on these longish pedicels, so they really show off really well. And I'm showing green, but they can be solid green. There are a lot of horticultural variants that have different colors. This is a Chinese holly, Ilex cornuta. Chinese or horned holly. This is one called Masahi's Gold, which really is just a name that we put on it. It had no name when we got it from Masahi's nursery in Japan. We've got Ilex Woe Nellie. So this was a gold sport that Tony Avent found on Nellie Stevens. There are those. And then Ilex X attenuata, which is a naturally occurring hybrid that you can find in the wild, but this is Golden Foster. So this is a really nice upright pyramidal one. So all those are pretty easy to identify as hollies. Even though they have gold leaves, they've got those serrate edges. They look like what we think of as hollies. But then there are other things. This is a tree, grows pretty straight up, kind of sparsely branched. You know, if I were to come across this and look at it, the first thing I might think is it's some kind of cherry, some kind of prunus, something in that family. You know, as I look further, I'd see the lenticels. Well, a lot of plants can have those lenticels. If it were a cherry, if it were prunus, it would have little glands on its leaf back here. This doesn't have that. It's got a grooved petiole, a little, it may be hard to see, but a little groove down the petiole, which can often be an identifier. But this would be a tough one, though, to identify. And let me tell you, I've said this before when I've been out, when I talk about collecting plants in the wild, the number of times you have 2, 3, 4, 6 plant experts all looking at a plant and trying to figure out what family it is in happens more often than you would think. All right. Any questions about any of that stuff? All right. All right, keep going. So can people get to their little reaction there? I'm gonna quiz everybody. Haven't done this before. This is gonna be interactive. If you're on a treadmill, don't fall off. But you go down to the reaction, you can put a thumb up. So I'm going to show 2 plants, and I'm going to get you to vote on one and then the other, and to tell me which one is a holly. Each one will be one that's a holly and one that is not a holly. So, oh, I'm sorry. I saw that. The last species that I showed, this one is Ilex micrococa. It's a Chinese species. Ilex micrococa grows into a fairly tall tree. Okay. I've got 2 plants here, both very similar, right? I'll kind of turn them around. So, people think the one in this hand is a holly or this hand. I don't know if this looks right or left to y'all, so I'm just gonna say this hand, this hand. So if you think it's this hand, put a thumbs up. I can't tell if thumbs are going up or not. Maybe that won't work. Okay, so we have 2 very similar plants. How would you tell these apart? Well, there's one, it's not a trick question. There's one easy way. Hollies have almost always alternate leaves. So let me get where you can see. So right here, you can see leaves are alternate on the stem. You got a leaf, got space, got another leaf. Space, another leaf, space, another leaf. Sometimes at the tip, it gets hard to tell, but so you know this is a holly, or excuse me, you know this can be a holly. This one is opposite. So it is not a holly. So this one is an osmanthus. Osmanthus heterophyllus, the changeable leaf heterophyllus. That means that a leaf that changes as different forms. Whereas this is a holly called Miss Patricia that we have right outside the visitor center, I mean the McSwain Center, which I love. It's a beautiful plant.
Mark?
Yes, ma'am. Sir.
The reactions will appear above everyone's face in the gallery view, and we're probably all watching in speaker view, so you're probably
Yeah, we won't do that. Okay, another couple. We won't quiz people, but just to see. We've got 2 that look kind of similar, have entire leaves, kind of yellowish. I couldn't reach the best yellow on this one. And then we have this other one with entire leaves and kind of yellowish. This is an Alyssium. This is Florida Sunshine. This is Ilex integra, Ogon. Ogon is Japanese for gold. This is one of the parents of cherry bomb. That's why cherry bomb has those entire leaves to it. One of the ways you'd be able to tell these apart is hollies, even when very young growth, tend to have fairly woody stems, whereas the Alyssium is very, very, until it gets a little bit older, there's just not a lot of hardened lignin in there that to hold that steady. So it will, over time, this will get stiffer and woodier, but the young growth is almost like it's a herbaceous plant, whereas the holly, even the new growth, is pretty stiff. That's one way to tell them apart. There are some other things. The buds are different. No lenticels on the Elysium, but there's a lot you can do with that. Let's see, another great one where people get confused. These are variegated ones. They could be green leafed or variegated, but have two plants that look pretty darn similar. The holly, if you look at it, it has alternate leaves, and this is the holly. It's got shorter internodes. It's a little dwarf one called adorned, but it's got them. And then you have a boxwood with opposite leaves. Can't remember which one I took this off of, but boxwoods will always have opposite leaves, while the hollies will have those alternate leaves. So that's always a good way to first check to see what type of plant you have. Buds are very different. Obviously, if any of these are in flower or fruit, it's much, much easier to tell. Another one that can get confused, and again, you look at that leaf arrangement, some of the smaller leafed hollies, some of the smaller leaf viburnums, like this Viburnum obovatum, can look and grow very similar to a holly, some of the Ilex crenata, the Japanese holly, another one of the biggest selling plants. This viburnum will have some bigger stipules than most hollies on there. It will also, the buds are different. You can't see them right now this time of year, but when it was, in the fall and winter, you can. But it can be difficult. Like I said, that Ilex micrococa, if I were to see that in the wild with no flowers or fruit, I may be unsure of what it was. Okay, one more and then we'll get into it. Deciduous ones. So we do have deciduous hollies. This is alternate leaved Ilex verticillata. This is opposite leaved Calicarpa. But you can see superficially they're pretty similar otherwise. So it can be tricky. Ilex verticillata is one of our native deciduous hollies. Okay, I won't torture you with any more. I will plan to bring in more real life examples for future talks when I'm talking about things. It actually didn't even occur to me until this morning that I could do that for this. So
we can see your presentation.
It takes a while, but you live and learn. So, like I said, this talk originated as a talk I gave to the Holly Society. I'm not going to go through all the hollies I talked about. I will tell you that what is still in this talk are going to be unusual plants, and that's only because when I talk to the Holly Society, I can't talk about the plants that they all know better than I do. So I have to, go for some of the more oddball ones. But most of these are ones we've grown at the Ralston Arboretum. Few that we haven't, some that we've grown very successfully, some that are no longer here. But I really kind of trimmed it down to the ones that I really like, and I think could potentially have a spot in horticulture. So do want to let you know, kind of, this is when we talk about here at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, you can see where hollies kind of fit into our overall collections, if you will. A lot of maples, a lot of magnolias, a lot of hollies, oaks, acubas, redbuds, ardisia. Actually, does anybody, you put it in the chat, anybody have a guess as to what genus we have the most taxa of? That's species, cultivars, selections of. Chris, you can interrupt and yell out one or two if you want to, if people put them in there.
Someone just said Cercis, redbud.
Nope, we only have 63 of those. They're on this list.
Oh, yep, they are.
So if you get another one, let me know. It surprises me every time I remember what it is. So I'll start with this one. Evergreen shrubs are hard to take pictures of. I'll say that. This is Ilex viridis. Viridis just means green, so it's the green holly, I guess. It's an evergreen shrub or small tree, generally 3 to maybe 15 feet tall, from southern China. And I'll be talking about a lot that are from Asia. It's got, small leaf. You kind of see that it looks a bit like Ilex vomitoria, our native Yaupon holly, which is a fantastic plant. It's very closely related to one that I just saw for the first time this past fall called Ilex triflora, which we were very excited about. The Ilex triflora had slightly more rounded leaves. At least we think it's Ilex triflora. And it could be a boxwood replacement. It was dense and tight and beautiful. And this past trip, the places I went in China this past year, I saw more fascinating hollies than I ever have. Probably on the one trip, I saw more interesting hollies than on almost all my other collecting trips in Asia. Unfortunately, for some reason, I didn't take pictures of them. I have very, very few pictures of them. So I'm going to have to get with some of the folks that I travel with and see if they have pictures, or when we grow out the plants, because holly fruit is easy to collect. Hopefully we'll have some to show. Now, one that we grow here at the Arboretum, although this is not the picture of it at the Arboretum, is kind of a widespread holly through southern Asia. It grows in China, South Korea, Japan, Vietnam. It's Ilex rotunda, and it's known as the kurugani, or in more Europe and Western areas, the king's holly. If you ask me about plants that have just made me stop and my jaw drop, this is one of the ones on the list. This is the Ilex rotunda at the Coastal Georgia Botanic Garden. It used to be called the Bamboo Farm. Now it's called the Coastal Georgia Botanic Garden. And it's right by the parking lot. This is like, I had just gotten out of my car and took a picture of this thing that I didn't know what it was. I thought it was some subtropical tree in flower. It turns out it was Ilex rotunda. Now, this is not to be confused with Ilex cornuta rotunda, the cultivar rotunda of Ilex cornuta. This is the species Ilex rotunda. This is the foliage of Ilex rotunda. It is beautiful, glossy green. You can kind of see that. It's almost like it's a white edge. That's just because the leaf is so thick, and that's the bottom of the leaf showing. Ilex cornuta rotunda is one of the most viciously spiny hollies that you can grow. And it was very, very popular. You see it a lot in old landscapes. You still see it. And it is spiny as all get out. I don't know why people like to grow it, but they do. You will see that as we go through that when I started weeding out the ones that weren't my favorites, we lost a lot of the spiny, prickly ones. I do like the more kinder, gentler ones. Ilex fargesii. Now, this is subspecies Fargesii, variety Fargesii. This is another evergreen from southern China. Grows as a small tree, 15 to 25 feet tall. Has these long, these are 4 to almost 6 inches long, and kind of these yellowish stems, and then these kind of dusty green leaves. First time I saw this plant was at Quarry Hill Botanic Garden, and it just knocked my socks off. It was such a beautiful plant. Now what I really want to see, there's Ilex fargesii subspecies, I think it's linearifolia, where the foliage is even narrower. Man, I want to see that. This one is one that should be very good for us. We've grown it here before. We don't have it in the collection right now, but I think we have one in the nursery from our friends at Atlanta Botanic Garden. Now, you may recognize this if you've been around the Arboretum for a long time. This is the old lath house with that snow fencing on there. This is Ilex bergeri. This is a very upright, narrow plant, especially when young. It'll widen with age. evergreen tree, grows 20 to 50 feet tall, grows South China to Japan. What we have at the Arboretum is male. There's a female in another collection near here that fruits, has very small, bright red fruits. See the new growth on this is beautiful. Doesn't have a spiny leaf. Doesn't have a spiny leaf at all. This was a plant that I really was excited about. We always are looking for these upright plants. Landscapers love these upright plants for hedging, for whatever, but evergreen plants. And so, we started taking cuttings of the female and this male, and we got them to a bunch of nurserymen here in the area, Johnston County nurserymen. And they were all excited about it. And man, we stuck a bunch of these and grew them. And what we found was they grow really slow. Hollies in general tend to grow pretty slow, but it would take, in 3 years, you could have a 3-gallon plant that was about maybe 30 inches tall and just a stick, no branches, nothing on it, just kind of a stick with leaves on it. It would take 5-6 years to get a good saleable 3-gallon plant. And that's just not profitable for nurserymen to do, because you're not going to go buy a 3-gallon holly for $150 when you can get, $25 or $35 one that's going to do the same work, but is a different species. And so that's why sometimes these plants are not available as nursery plants. So as much as I say this is an amazing plant, or I say this is an amazing plant, unless it makes sense in a nursery setting, it's not going to get into the nursery trade. Which is why, we distribute plants to our members and to enthusiasts, and we sell plants because we still think these plants should get out of, and people should have access to them. One we've tried to grow but have not had success is this Ilex parado. This is the form, the subspecies Azorica this is from the Azores. It's an evergreen tree. Isn't that lovely? This is growing somewhere where they get some cold because it's growing with a tree peony, but it's not growing somewhere where it gets real cold. It just doesn't, it won't survive that. This is the mainland form, the European form. Now, the Flora Europaea says this is a form of Ilex aquifolium. I don't know. It doesn't look like that to me, but maybe. I guess if you see Ilex aquifolium all through its range, typically Ilex aquifolium is pretty spiny. This one would have more of a chance surviving for us, but still would be probably, it's really growing down where they're growing oranges and lemons and things like that. But they're cool. I want to put them in there just so you can see kind of some of what these subtropical type ones look like, because those are really the only ones that I have in here. Ilex franchetiana. This is another one that I love just because those leaves are so dark and glossy and the fruit is so bright red. This is a southern China to Myanmar kind of plant, and it grows kind of as a shrub or a tree. It can get to 30 feet, but it's more of a 6 or 8 foot plant typically, especially in the landscape. Probably a little bit, you wouldn't want to go much colder than zone 7, but in zone 7 should be fine. Shinum giensis. I have never seen this one in the wild, but I want to. Shinunjaya is in western Hubei province of China. Shinunjaya Shan is a mountain that's got a very, very interesting flora. And there's quite a few plants that are found there and really nowhere else. This is one, it's got the smaller leaf, more like that Viridis I showed at the beginning, or Triflora, or our Yopon, kind of grayish bark, but real neat carnations around there. It's a pretty plant, and I love these hollies where they hold their fruits out on kind of a longer peduncle. They seem to show off a little bit better that way. Now, another one that's similar to that is one that I saw this in the wild. I just absolutely fell in love with it. Ilex sugarokii. This grows Sichuan, Taiwan, southern Japan. In southern Japan, they have a subspecies, longa pedunculata. So the fruit stem is even longer. I don't know that breve pedunculata is a valid subspecies. Some authorities say it is, some don't. But it has these smaller leaves, generally about inch and a half, glossy green, no spines or serrations on there except for a little bit, especially when it's young towards the tip. And then this really showy fruit that'll turn bright red. We are growing this, both this and the longa pedunculata. They have been painfully slow, which may mean it won't be able to get this into the mainstream nursery. But when I saw this plant in the wild, it was about a 4 foot by 4 foot rounded shrub. Didn't look like it had been pruned on. This is the fruit from the plant. It was just starting to ripen, but you could just tell how beautiful it was going to be and how dense and tight it was. And I thought just without any improvements, it would be a phenomenal landscape plant. But if it doesn't want to grow fast enough, then that's probably not going to happen. And ours just really hasn't even grown fast enough for us to take many cuttings on it and see if we can push it in the nursery. Ilex rugosa, some of you who are members of the Arboretum may have received Ilex rugosa from us. We grew out a bunch of seedlings from these plants. You can see a couple little fruits in here. Here, little red fruits. We collected in Japan up at high elevations. We collected it above where the kind of the main ski place for the Nagano Olympics was. And it was this ground cover this plant that made a ground cover. I had never seen Ilex rugosa before. What's interesting is I had never seen this in the US at all. But Ilex rugosa is one of the parents of the blue hollies, like Blue Princess and Blue Maid and Blue Prince and those. Blue Stallion, this is one of the parents, which probably explains why the blue hollies don't grow so well for us, because this sucker hates the heat. So if you've been with us for a long time, we probably gave you this plant, and your plant, like ours here at the Arboretum, is likely dead. If it's not, let me know, and we may want some cuttings of it, because you may have the one heat-tolerant Ilex rugosa. But it's a neat little evergreen ground cover, kind of scrambles around in a woodland. See, it's kind of got all the leaves through it and around it. So interesting, more for what it's the parent of than anything else. A couple more wild collected plants, Ilex ericinensis. I think this is the one, kind of like that micrococa with the thinly papery leaves, but then these large fruits. Didn't get a chance to see those bright red fruits. I did all really the evergreen plants, but this is a deciduous one, Ilex chapaensis. This is South China, Vietnam. This is a really nice form with new purplish growth, but it forms a tall tree, and it loses its leaves. One thing I should mention about evergreen hollies, people, kind of like they do with pines, people occasionally call and say, I've got a bunch of leaves falling off my holly. Just because something is evergreen doesn't mean it keeps its leaves forever. A lot of hollies only keep their leaves until the new growth pushes out, the new growth comes out and it drops its old leaves. The most typical form, they keep their leaves for 3 years. The longest that I know of is 4 years that they'll keep their leaves, and then they'll kind of shed on the interior. A couple other ones just from wild collections, an Ilex from Imeshan, not sure what it is, but it's a real pretty one. Not a great picture, but it was pouring rain on me. One from southern China. This might be Ilex ficoidea, the ficus-leaved Ilex, and you can see kind of where the leaves look kind of like our houseplant, the Ficus benjamina. The leaves are a little bit larger and more serrate than what I typically think of as ficoidea, but you can see that makes a really handsome tree. And there are spiny ones. I'll put one spiny one in there for you. Boy, there's some viciously spiny ones that we see out in the wild. Ilex pernii we see in the wild, and it is one of the most vicious plants around. This might be Ilex bioritsis. But there are also great cultivated ones that are out there and available. This is one called Yawkey. Mostly with plants, I like red fruited forms better than yellow fruited ones, but this native Yopon holly with these almost translucent gold berries, I think is one of the finest fruiting plants we have growing at the Arboretum, bar none. Its only problem is it fruits so heavy sometimes that it splits itself apart. Kind of a fun one that was found by the now director of the National Arboretum, Richard Olson. He found it when he was a student here at NC State, I believe. May have been after he left here, but I think it was while he was a student. Ilex opaca, we, with him, named it rollover. You see all the leaves are twisted up. Every single leaf is curled up in weird little shape. It fruits well. It's a good female. We have it up near the parking lot. He found it as a little seedling by a rest stop when he was traveling. And, you know, I think a lot of us, myself included, probably would have looked at it and thought somebody had sprayed it with some herbicide and hadn't quite killed it, because it kind of had that look. It's kind of funky as a little plant, but it's really grown on me as it's gotten larger. I think from a distance, it's handsome, and up close, it's, you know, kind of weird and interesting, which I like. That would be me if people said I was handsome from a distance. Certainly weird up close. Another one with a North Carolina connection. This is Ilex crenata adorned. This was found by Pat McCracken, who has the nursery Garden Treasures in Wendell. It was a sport from Hugendorn, which is why, you know, kind of the adorned name got on there. This has been a really, really good plant. I know at one point Pat was looking at protecting it, trying to get a patent on it. I don't know what happened with that, but I don't know if he'd be able to, because it's been grown and displayed and distributed so much that it wouldn't really work. I do wish it was more in cultivation, because it's, in my mind, it's the best gold Japanese holly, Ilex crenata, that's available. There are a bunch more out there, but Hugendorn is one of the hardiest Japanese hollies, and this adorned seems to have taken that characteristic, hardier than most of the other ones that are out there. I just think it's a phenomenal plant. Some little funky things. Ilex pedunculosa. This is one we got as Frosty Morn, and then we got another one called Mountain Mist, and think they're different, but really need to look at them kind of at the same time of year to see if they are truly different plants. Not a very good variegation on either of them. It doesn't tend to be terribly stable either. You can kind of see some leaves that are looking pretty solid green there. Our native inkberry, Ilex glabra, as just the regular plant, I find pretty boring. Gold mine is pretty neat with that gold edge to the leaf. This is another one that's just it's a sport from gold mine, where it's just the leaf is entirely gold when it comes out in new growth, and then it goes green. That's kind of actually like this better than that, but kind of interesting. We have a vomitoria, a Yopon holly, that does the same thing as that last one, called Gold Top, and it has, the new growth is bright gold. It's a big plant. This is a plant that, if you were growing this, you should never do what we've allowed it to do at the Arboretum, which is grow into a great big plant. This is a plant that you want to hedge or shear or otherwise keep smaller and cut on every year, so that you get the most of this bright gold growth. If you had this out in sun and you sheared it every winter, new growth would come out. It would be bright gold. You let it kind of go and turn green, and then shear it again maybe once in early to midsummer, like maybe beginning of July, this time of year. Shear it one more time. It would flush out again gold. It would, I mean, you'd keep the plant in kind of in check, but also really get its showiest properties. And it's a female. You can see the red berries in there. So one more reason to want to grow it. And it's really gold, and it's beautiful. The new growth with those pinkish red stems that you often get in Ilex vomitoria is really, really spectacular. One I lusted after for years, one of the big leaf holly, Ilex latifolia, variegated form called Snow Flurry. Finally got the plant after many, many years. I should say I finally got the plant for the Arboretum after many, many years. It's a plant that I had taken cuttings on over and over again and never had any luck with it, but finally have it going, and hopefully we'll be able to do more. But as a large plant, it is breathtaking. And I'll end with one that got away. I have a few white whales out there that I'm still chasing down. This is that Ilex rotunda I showed at the beginning, the Kurigane or Lord's holly. This was a gold leaf form I saw in Japan at a consignment nursery. It was way too big for me to take. And I don't know if you can see this, but it's actually been cut back very hard. The trunk here is probably 5 or 6 inches in diameter. It's got a relatively small root ball. It's just healed into a bed out there. It's been cut back, and then this is the new growth on it. I have showed it to several people who travel to Japan a lot. Nobody has ever seen it that I know of, but they all say, oh, wow, that'd be great if you can find that again. I'd love to get some of that. So I saw it on my first trip to Japan, have never seen it in any subsequent trips. If I were there now, I would have found somebody at this nursery and explained to them that I couldn't take a huge tree, but I'd happily give them some money to let me take cuttings on this. But I was young and naive and didn't know I could do that. So if I ever see it again, if you ever see it again, tell me. Okay. There we are. I am happy to have some chats to answer some questions if people had them.
Going back to your earlier thing, Mark, there were some guesses for the genera. Someone guessed pine, which I didn't get a number for. And someone guessed viburnum, which I found that we have 97. But we might have a winner with Marianne. She said narcissus.
Narcissus is correct.
Yay.
More daffodils, jonquils than anything else here, which most people don't realize. Thanks in large measure, I would imagine, to the late Dr. Gus de Hertog, world authority on bulbs. I would imagine he was the source of many, many, many of those.
And as Marianne said, Brent and Becky as well.
Yeah, Brent and Becky certainly have as well, especially in recent years, but we've got a lot of really cool old ones. In fact, Brent comes here to get pictures of some of the older ones, and we share with him what we can. We share with him a very few because we don't have many that he doesn't have or hasn't grown, and then he shares a lot back with us. So I'm going to answer his question about propagation just a second. I want to remind everybody, it's in the chat. There's a guest book. If you're here, we'd love before you leave to go ahead and click on that and fill that out, just so we know who we're talking to, and also so you can give me some ideas for additional topics to talk about. So propagation. Are hollies in general difficult or easy to grow from cuttings? Yes. It all depends on the holly. You know, Japanese hollies, Ilex crenata, very easy to grow from cuttings. Ilex Nellie Stevens, very easy to grow from cuttings. In fact, there's some great old photos from JC that show him grafting English hollies, Ilex aquifolium, on top of Nellie Stevens cuttings that then he puts in a rooting bed. So he's rooting the Nellie Stevens hollies while the Nellie Stevens rootstock while he's grafting. So it's Pat McCracken, who's a great grafter, said, yeah, that's easy to do that. There are some that are very difficult to graft. I mean, to root. So it really just depends on the plant. Also depends on the maturity. Some of the spiny hollies, you can see it a little bit on this one, not so much, but younger leaves will be kind of spiny, and as they get older, they'll get more and more entire. As they get more entire on those plants that do start with spiny leaves, they can be more difficult to propagate. Mostly it's a matter of timing and the right conditions. I would imagine most any of them can be rooted. Seed can be tricky. Seed often has a very long dormancy, sometimes a double dormancy, and that's because the seeds are in what's called a pyrene, so it's a drupe. You have a fleshy outer part, and then you have kind of a harder shell, and then the seeds inside that. And if you don't, get through that hard outer shell and just get the seed, they can be very difficult to have the seed germinate. But if you do take them out and sow them fresh, they'll come up pretty quickly usually. Any other questions that I missed?
Annabelle just asked about the timing to root Nellies.
We root most of our, in general, we root most of our broadleaf evergreens during the winter. That's in part because most of them will root them, and you can't root other stuff. You can't root a lot of the deciduous stuff at that time very well. So we typically, from once they're dormant, December, January, February, maybe even early March, you can root them. But Nellies you can root kind of any time, really. They're unless they're real early spring where they're flushing out growth and where they're shutting down in the fall. Really the only times that you're going to have real struggles with them. All right. Any other questions?
Looks like it for the questions. I don't remember seeing anyone that came through the chat while you were talking.
All right. So you got them the parentage of, I could have told the parentage of Nellie Stevens if I'd seen that question, but not Mary Nell. And
I remember that one when I read it, but I did have to look up Mary Nell.
I did not know it had Pernii in it, but that kind of makes sense.
Well, that's what I read. I should have given my sources. Oh, someone just asked if you know of a place to get gold top. I've never seen it at a nursery myself.
I've never seen it at a nursery myself. I love gold top, and I have a great spot for it in my garden. So it may be a plant that gets put on the propagation list for plant sales or distributions, because I love it. And really we need to hat rack it. We need to just cut it all the way back to a trunk and down to about 3 or 4 feet, cut all the branches off and let it resprout. So maybe we'll do that and take a whole bunch of cuttings and stick those, because I do think it's on there. Oh, Marianne, thank you. Marianne asked what's on the plant cart this week. The plant cart will be out tomorrow. It goes out Tuesday and Thursday right outside our gate. I don't know everything that's on there. I think there are some figs. I know there are a couple new things on there, including Inspiration passion flower. I know we restocked on Asclepias incarnata, which was very popular. Oh, in the chat, there is a link to the list of what's on there. Maybe somebody will look at that and let me know what else is on there.
It is the Asclepia incarnata, Canna orange tiger, Disperopsis pernii, Ficus carica cadota, Miletia pulchra, Passiflora inspiration, that one's a new one, Schizophragma hydrangioides moonlight, Sedum firecracker, Sempervivum arachnoideum, and Sempervivum gold nugget. Oh,
they're good plants out there. Yeah, and there's some real deals. Disperopsis pernii is just a phenomenal shade plant. Expect next week an even bigger switch out. So Tuesday and Thursday next week should have a lot of different plants on there for them from what's on right now. We're going to keep switching them up. It has proven to be popular. So we love that we're getting plants into the hands of people. Yeah, and you can find that if you look on our website, you can see the list at horticulture, plant sales, and then the plant cart list, plant sale buggy on there. And it will be, at the latest, it will be updated by 3 o'clock on Monday and 3 o'clock on Wednesday at the very latest. So you'll know what's going out there Tuesday and Thursday.
And if I can rewind a little bit and plug what I hope might be a live in-person program, a great way to get plants from the Arboretum is to take the propagation workshops. In theory, we might have one in late January.
Yes. Yeah. Couple things. The plant buggy, yes, it is cash. It's exact amount. We don't have anybody to give you change. And checks are what you can do in there. and plants tend to be $5, $8, $10, $15. And what time is the plant cart available Tuesday and Thursday? It is out from
8 a.m. to 4 p.m.
8 to 4 p.m.
And no, Dick, though, that wasn't a promise.
Yes.
It's a hope.
I know.
Well, I hope to see everybody next week. The talk next week came from a keynote I gave to the North Carolina Invasives Council, which led to some really great discussion. So I'm hoping next week it will lead to some great discussion with y'all as well afterwards. It should be interesting, I hope.
So Marilyn, I will work on getting information on the web page, but it is on our home page itself for the dates and the times that the sale goes live.
Yeah. What we need like a food truck, a plant truck that we drive around, and open it up, put it outside, drive to the Triangle and put it outside the bars late at night, get people to buy plants late at night.
One of the groups at APGA conference mentioned they have a portable greenhouse.
Is that right?
Yeah, thought that's pretty neat. And no one asked about it this week, so I guess they've forgotten about it. But Mark has gotten me the file for the at-home midweek with Mark, his home garden tour. I will work on getting that one up very soon. I just didn't have time earlier this week to get it recorded or encoded. We'll have that one real soon.
All right. So we're gonna leave. I'm gonna leave this up for a little bit. So because in the chat is that link again for the guest book. So hopefully people are able to get to that. We won't cut you off too quickly for it. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
See you next week.
Thank you.